Hi, business ethics students. We are going to talk about self-care in anticipation of you completing your final exam, which will be very similar, very similar, in fact, exactly the same as your midterm. However, what I would like you to do is now deepen your understanding of self-care. We talked about self-care as something you have to do for yourself, but also that you can look after your communities. So self-care, double down is what I am calling this lecture. And hopefully this will act as a guide for you as you consider and ruminate over the next few days here about how you can create a meaningful final exam. So to start, you might remember that we talked about in some of your reading books and some of your book clubs, we talked about the three main actors in society, or like how business ethics is considered. So is the society player, there is the business group, and then there is the government. And they all influence one another. And for instance, the government will regulate business. Society provides legitimacy to business. And business needs to uphold a certain standard to maintain that legitimacy from society. They need to maintain regulation so that government supports them. And government also needs to create an environment where business can thrive. Society needs government to create a business environment so that they can work. You are probably represented under each of these actors. And for instance, you are part of society. You are likely part of government. If you have a vote, or if you have worked for political campaigns, or you have considered government policy, perhaps you've written a letter to a politician. You might be advocating for certain policy. And in terms of business, you may be a business owner. You might work for a business. These are all areas that you as an individual will likely be embedded in at some point, or you are now. So some of the things we want to bring to attention around capitalism and how it can erode those actors and their environments, and can also create conditions to influence the individual experience. So your experience are things like surveillance. When you engage with technology, you are often being surveyed. You have apps on your phone, but there's also surveillance that's more explicit in different societies. Capitalism can create alienation from your place. So when you consider that, capitalism actually encourages people to move from their home communities, it also asks people to take actions that may not be good for the place that they live in. When I think about recycling, for instance, that's one way we mitigate some of the waste that is produced in our communities, but it is only like a small part of what we could do. Capitalism can erode individuals' self-image. So when we're looking at fashion, or we're looking at gender, or we're looking at sexuality, the self-image of an individual can be eroded by the kind of monoculture that capitalism creates. Capitalism needs to create revenue, and often that is done through worker exploitation. That can run the gamut from incredibly exploitative practices, probably in unregulated environments, all the way to simply making a profit from the labor of others, and that profit goes back into the business or the corporation or to shareholders who actually didn't create the revenue. Workers created the revenue. Capitalism in this environment can create injustices. That can be environmental injustice, it could be human injustice, it can be injustice around indigenous rights. And we know that capitalism promotes loss of diversity in human beings and their lived experience, as well as biodiversity of animals and ecology. Audre Lorde is the inspiration for these assessments, where you look deeply at how capitalism, and to a secondary extent, neoliberalism type policies have influenced your humanity and your individual experience in the world. And Audre Lorde said, "Without community, there is no liberation." And as you look at your final essay, I want you to think not just about self as individual care, but we have to think about self as a person within a community, and how we can extend our liberation into our community. Audre Lorde said, "In our work and in our living, we must recognize that difference is a reason for celebration and growth rather than a reason for destruction." Capitalism incentivizes a removal or pushing of people who are different out to the margins because they want to have a monoculture. Business encourages a monoculture so that there is a market for their goods. The type of goods that we receive in a capitalist society has an incentive to become one type of good in some ways, while marketing it as different from one another because it is profitable to do so. When you think about your macroeconomic studies where they looked at monopolies, oligopolies, perfectly competitive markets, you want to think about, okay, what kind of products are they really selling? How does that work? So people who are different or are not considered profitable to the labor market are often not marketed to. Their needs in society become less because they don't promote a monoculture, and that becomes less profitable to corporate interests. So when a system defines positive in terms of economic profit rather than in terms of human needs, we end up looking away from human needs. Human needs that remind us of our intrinsic worth and allow individuals to thrive. Any kind of thriving of the individual becomes discouraged in late-stage capitalism. Late-stage capitalism has created more independence and less collective and community considerations. It has reduced the human experience in terms of being able to have joy, connection, self-exploration, self-growth, confidence, creativity, morality, and acceptance of others, and a lack of prejudice and problem solving in our communities. Capitalism incentivizes our communities to be less important and market solutions to be more important. And I think as part of your assignment, I would like you to consider what this means to you. Are you dependent on a system that perhaps undermines your ability for those higher level needs of human experience to be met? So the world is changing, and we've talked about change last week. I asked you to engage in some thoughts and discussions about change that is needed. Self-care is the catalyst to respond and build with community care. So self-care is, I need to look after me. Many of your initial essays in your midterm showed me how you look after yourself in the face of capitalism. But community care is, we need to look after each other. And As I discussed already, capitalism disincentivizes community care to some extent. It says the market will look after us. And what I'm inviting you to consider in this final essay is how can we look after our community outside of market forces? So how can we use our power and our resources to support and provide for our communities? Your community is defined only by you. So you might consider your community your neighborhood. You might consider a spiritual community that you are part of. You might consider your extended family your community. You might consider your friends your community, your sports club a community that you belong to, the geography that you live in, your clan that you're a part of. So the dimensions of self-care can not just be about I'm going to do yoga and eat vegetables. It has a political, a social dimension, and it really requires relationship and breaking isolation. Capitalism, unfortunately, can lead us down the rabbit hole of saying who deserves to be connected and who does not deserve to be connected. I'm going to give you some examples of people, when I think about how they create community care, have done so in recent history and are doing so now. So this is Sligo Molly Wickham. She is a Wet'suwet'en land defender. She lives on her traditional territory in Wet'suwet'en, which is close to Smithers, or part of Smithers is part of it. And she opposes a pipeline expansion on the traditional territory of the Wet'suwet'en. She has become the face of land defenders in that area. She lives on her territory with her family. She is part of her community, and her community values are around the traditional land use of their territory. Molly has been an advocate. She has spoken at many events that I have attended over the last few years. She works very hard for her community. And I would suggest perhaps at the detriment of her personal self-care in some ways. But this is someone who I really admire, and I think of how she engages with community care. She cares for her community, and certainly in the face of capitalism and how it works in Canada through resource extraction. This is Jamie Davis. She is a terrace artist, and last year or was it 2020? Jamie is an artist. She is a jeweler. She's a weaver in our community. She is Gitxsan and Nisga'a, and she inspired her community on Facebook to match donations for the Terrace View Lodge, which is where elders live in later stages of their life to receive care. And the Terrace View Lodge was creating a bit of a campaign around making the doors of the rooms of the residents feel more homely. And you can see the before and after in this picture. And when Jamie heard about this fundraiser, she challenged her community and she said, if we together can raise money for 2 doors, I will pitch in a matching and we can get 2 more. And she did that. And this was an inspiring, I think, way of serving a community. She mentioned that her grandmother actually spent her final years at Terrace View Lodge and she wanted to give back to her community. I see this group as a group of people who are creating community. They are a group of cricket players in Terrace. They are advocating for the city to put a terrace pitch in. I think this is amazing. I'm excited to see this happening. This is not a capitalist endeavor. These people just want to get together in their community of sport and have a place and they are impacting their place. And I find this very inspiring. Newcomers to Canada, many of these people were students of mine in the past. I recognize many of the people in this picture, and I am proud to say that they went to Terrace Community Council and asked for support to create a cricket pitch so that they can properly play. This is an example of engaging with community care, coming together in relationship to advance something for your community. This is another interesting endeavor that one of my friends did over the, was it federal elections? The most recent federal election. Rod Taylor is someone who, I think he was from the Christian Heritage Party, and she created a Discord server during the debate so that people could come together, and she created a game over the things that Rod Taylor would say, because he has these sound bites that we hear every time there's a federal election. This gentleman says all the same kind of things. So she created a game. She sent the game out to her friends, and then we all got together on a Discord server and discussed, well, first of all, we played the game together. But secondly, it was an interesting exercise because we got to talk about the talking points of the people in the debate, and it helped kind of create a community that could engage politically. And I found this to be a way to engage with community care that was fun and inspiring. Rajwant Kaur was a student of mine at Coast Mountain College in the fall of 2020. I don't think she's with the college anymore, although I'm not sure. So she, during a student session, mentioned that some of her instructors at the college were asking her to take part in surveillance software. So she had to actually buy surveillance software for her tests for one of her courses. Rajwant wrote a letter to the coordinator of the business administration program. She connected with me as her instructor, and she connected with other students in her program. Now, I think what's important for you to know is this was an online program that she was doing. You are all, or some of you are in an online program as well. And so you will understand that the next level of difficulty in engaging with your community. However, she persevered. She got me to back her. We got her letter in front of the right people. Unfortunately, at that level, those people were not able to make any significant changes. However, I took her letter up to the Education Council of the college, and June 2021, she wasn't even a student at that time. She wasn't engaged in any courses. I took her letter. We did some research together. We had the backing of most of her colleagues in the program, and this ended up with a motion to ban the use of remote invigilation tools that involve automated recording and algorithmic analysis of data captured during invigilation. So the surveillance software that she was subjected to, she pointed out the problems with it. She pointed out that it was a private company offering these things, and she drew a hard line, gathered her community around her, and through that, momentum was built to ban this software, which from a teacher standpoint is very positive, from a learner's standpoint is very positive. And I think earlier in this presentation, I talked about how capitalism is increasing the use of surveillance on all of us. And I appreciated this student's efforts in saying, hey, this is not okay for our community. So some principles of community care are: you cannot care for others without caring for yourself. So you all showed me ways that you care for yourself in your first midterm. Now, I would like you, if possible, to level up and show me how you might engage with community care. For community care to take place, you have to be radically open. You have to share your ideas and knowledge with others in ways you may not be comfortable with. It's advantageous to a capitalist system that we don't come together in community and share our ideas. So you must overcome that and share your ideas and knowledge. Community care needs to be disruptive to the status quo. The status quo is highly influenced by market forces, and community care must disrupt those. Differences need to be acknowledged. Differences in community exist. We can't pretend that people are not different from one another. Community care only happens when we recognize differences and accept differences. Community care can be advocacy for a cause, and it can be shared with others as something that others and yourself care about, or you can influence others to care about it because it impacts them and the community. Community care can be something that you do over a long period of time, or it can be through a short connection. Community care, by definition, must be interdependent with the community. So for your final exam, I want you to think about this and how you might influence your community in positive ways. But I also want you to be careful, because I do not want you to take selfies of you helping needy people. I'm going to provide you a list of resources along with this presentation. And I want, in those resources, there is a link to an article about how this is unethical in itself. So you may not understand it right now. If you're curious about how this is unethical, there is a link in the annotated bibliography I will give you. You can check that out. But taking selfies helping needy people is unethical. Your photo essay can be representing your ideas. So, for example, you might say, oh, wow, okay, community care, can be exemplified by getting together with a group of entrepreneurs and doing a weekly meetup. So you may not necessarily do that right now. You might not be able to show me that you're going to create a weekly meetup between your entrepreneurial friends and yourself. You might do the first one though. So remember, this can be a representation of your ideas. It doesn't need to be exactly you carrying this out. Your final exam is short notice, right? You've only got a week, perhaps 2, to finish this final exam. While I would like you to be engaged with community care, ideally, that would be amazing. It may not be possible within your thinking of how community care can be implemented by you. So your essay can represent things, like the photos can represent things. Your captions will tell me underneath how the photo represents your thinking. If you have people other than yourself in your photo essay, please ask permission to take and share their photos before submitting it or having it as part of your submission. So I will leave you with a couple of quotes. One of them is, capitalism tells us that only those who are working towards financial profit should be creating disruption, and everyone else should be complacent consumers. And I would add to this, or complacent workers, complacent labor, or complacent consumers. And the reality is that disruption or innovation is not always in community's best interest when it's only coming consistently from the business sector. And without community, there is no liberation. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. So again, engaging with community, you will have members of your community that are different than you. And it is the best way forward to acknowledge those differences, to learn about the differences, and come together within those differences. It only benefits capitalism and market forces for us to be divided and to have suspicion around intentions of other types of people. Breaking down the barriers between differences is how we really create community.